let me thank, again, University of Rochester for allowing us to be here for something that is extremely important, is Black Boys, Men in Symposium. I tell people I have a memory like an elephant. And the superintendent, this is something that we've been talking about since he got to town almost 3.5 years ago, cracking this issue around African-American males. Obviously, I know a little bit about this topic because I am an African-American male, but I think the message that we need to send here today is that this is not just a black thing or an African-American thing. This is something that is important for our entire community, because what happens to one of us that is a member of the human family affects all of us. And I think that is what this symposium is about. The people, you are here because you are the doers and because you have the responsibility to help craft and solve a lot of these problems. And I know that it seems daunting, but I think that we have you here because you will be able to help us move forward in addressing some of the critical issues that we have around our African-American males. We know the statistics, they're bleak. And people always say to me, "Oh, why do you keep doing what you're doing? Don't you ever get tired?" And I'm always reminded of an older African-American woman that always says, "I ain't," and I know we're in an institution of higher learning, but I'm going to say it the way the older women from the South used to say it, "I ain't no ways tired." And we cannot rest and we cannot be tired every time we are confronted with a lot of the negative things that we see related to our African-American boys. You know, and I'm only going to be here for a couple of minutes. My wife gave me 15 minutes because we just had a new baby. And she told me, she said, baby boy. So she really said, you gotta go and just thank them and realize how important it is. And we started exchanging names. I said, let's exchange some names of some African-American men that have passed away or not have done well. And we came up with a long list of friends that we grew up with, that are now dead or in jail. And it was scary coming up with those names, because we realized that those are people who could have found the cure for cancer, found the cure for AIDS, invented a way to fly to the moon in 2 minutes. But all of that was lost. But then we started thinking about African-American males that are also doing positive things. And we said, because of that, we can't be discouraged and we can't lose heart, because there are still enough people in this community, black, white, green, or blue, that still can help make the ultimate difference. And now I can tell you, being now a parent of an African-American male, this even drives the issue home even more. And the superintendent said this to me, and Van said this to me. They said you'll be thinking about everything through that lens, even more so. And I think that as you go throughout today, we need to think about it through this lens. People say don't take it personal. No, we need to take it personal today. And we need to take it personal as we leave here, and we need others to take it personal, because this is about saving our young people. And we know all the statistics. We know the prison statistics. We know that if our young people aren't reading on grade level by third grade, what's going to happen. We know that prisons are based upon the third grade reading score, and we know that the vast majority of those currently incarcerated are African-American males. So we don't need to go through all the statistics, because we know them. But what we need to do now is move towards action. And I think today, that's what we are here about. There's plenty of people sometimes criticize the superintendent. And I'll tell you, sometimes I may knock him upside the head a couple of times. But let me tell you something. He has always extended his hands to others to come and help put forth solutions, and that's what today should be about. Today should be about solutions. So again, I welcome all of you and look forward to hearing about the work that will come, because this is only just a commencement. This is the beginning. The true work and the groundwork will happen not in this room or during this day, but will happen when you leave and go back to your respective stations in life and put forth plans to help improve the community. Now I get the opportunity to introduce my newest favorite person in the Rochester City School District, because something that we talked about 3.5 years ago when the superintendent first came to town was opening an all-boys school. Not private school, but as part of the Rochester City School District. And we waited, and the superintendent kept saying, we're going to do it, but we got to get the right person. I said, man, it's been 3.5 years, and we still don't have the right person. Then finally, in a leadership meeting, he said, I think we got the right person. I said, who? Did you go out of town? Did you go somewhere strong? He said, no, he used to be the principal of School 7, and now he's the principal of Charlotte, and his name is Wakili Moore. And I said, oh, okay, I think you got the right person. Any guy that would go up on top of a roof for a school and do all types of other things. He's not only is he a strong role model for African-American men, but he's also a strong model for educators that are coming into the profession, and we're blessed to have Wakili Moore as part of the Rochester City School District, and even more blessed the fact that he will be leading this all-boys school that will be opening in the fall of 2011. So please put your hands together for Wakili Moore.
Okay, good morning. Good morning. Guess that's a lot of pressure. I got to make it happen, huh? Again, like I said, good morning. Welcome to the Rochester Black Boys and Men Symposium. Definitely like to thank the University of Rochester for hosting us here, and President Seligman. And again, I want to thank you, all of you, for being here and taking the time and showing your willingness to participate and give your input and advice to help with the success of our African American young men. And I know there's a lot of people that wanted to be here who couldn't be here, so thank you to them as well. Again, my name is Wakili Moore, and I grew up right here in Rochester, New York, actually right across the river on Roslyn Street, off of Genesee. Yes, 19th Ward. My memories here of the U of R are actually some tough ones, because I just remember losing a lot of basketball games here when I was playing at St. John Fisher. But again, growing up as a young black man, I'll be honest with you, I wanted to be a basketball player. That's what I wanted to do. But there are a lot of role models out there that show there's other things you can do besides basketball. That's like I said, that's what I did. I rode my bike up here every day and just shot and shot and shot. But then, like I said, when that didn't work out, I had alternatives. And I look around this room, and I said, it's not going to be just me doing this. I'm looking around this room, and I'm not going to get all the names. I see Sean Nelms, our superintendent, Pastor Nicholas, Hannibal Solar, Tony Robinson, Jerome Watts, Dwayne Mahoney, who's, I don't know his exact title, but I know it's a big title at the Boys and Girls Club. Those are the examples that I'm trying to bring to our young men, that those are the options, not just sports, not just entertainment, that I want to get out there. That was my vision that I had for this school. And again, like I said, it's going to take not just one person. It's all of us in this room. That's why this is just great that I'm seeing this out here. And again, I'd like to thank President Seligman for having us here and hosting this. And again, let me introduce Dr. Seligman, because he's going to come up and speak to us right now.
Well, I want to thank you for meeting here. I am a real admirer of the superintendent, the school board, those who wrestle with the truly daunting challenges of K through 12 education. And I think the meeting today symbolizes an intellectual integrity that I particularly respect. No one, as has been suggested, needs to repeat graduation statistics, college-ready statistics. We know what the challenges are. We also know that schools don't exist in islands. Schools are part of a city at the moment which has too much poverty, which has security challenges, which does not have the job opportunities that we so need to provide the hope essential to inspiring our young students regardless of race or gender. What this meeting represents, it seems to me, is an opportunity, among other things, for the University of Rochester to say, we're in this together. We not only applaud your efforts, but we are deeply connected to them. Many of our students come from the Rochester City School District. How well they're prepared has immediate implications for their success here. We live here. This is our community. We want to see it succeed. And to the extent that higher graduation rates are correlated with greater success in life, there are few things we could applaud more. The 21st century, K through 12 education will be one of the great challenges. It is a frustrating, difficult challenge. And I so applaud those who don't get discouraged, who manage to smile no matter what the lousy headlines are on a given day. I want to focus on a second aspect of today's endeavor that I am particularly supportive of, and that's going beyond the statistics. If you look at numbers, it's cold, it's clinical, it's sterile. If you think in terms of human lives, if you think in terms of individuals you know, whether the individuals Malik referred to, whether it's students we've seen either succeed or fail, every one is a human success or tragedy. Everyone matters. And the real issue when you take a conference like this one, and soon one that will focus on Latino men, is to understand that by disaggregating, by looking at the special disparities, special problems, special initiatives, we've got a greater chance to help people. Recently, the University of Rochester experienced its own tragedy. One of our students died in a confrontation with another student. The second student is now facing criminal charges. These were individuals who, in every sense, were on their way to making it. They had succeeded in high school. They were doing well. There were no sense that they were troubled students. The tragedy had no overtones of race. That is, it was not inspired by differences between races. But the pain is disproportionately felt by African Americans, and particularly our male African Americans here. And I want to say that one of the things that I try to remind myself every single day is it's not about the numbers. It's about the human beings. You guys have about the toughest jobs in the world. I never kid myself. I've got it easy. I don't have the kind of security challenges some of your schools do. I'm a little bit insulated from poverty. To be sure, I have to work 26 hours a day. But at the same time, what you're trying to do is absolutely essential to the future of this country. And in that spirit, I welcome you, I applaud you. I take very seriously Malik's suggestion. This is the beginning of a conversation. Our doors will always be open to you. We're very proud of our School of Education, led by Rafaela Barassi. We're proud of initial efforts, whether it's the Rochester Promise, to provide scholarship support, a free ride, as we call it, or a full ride, for students from the Rochester City School District who qualify, our Upward Bound program, our current scholarship to help students go on to graduate school. But frankly, we know the work has just begun. And if there are constructive ways we can work with you to strengthen K through 12 education in Rochester, we know it's for everyone's benefit. I wish you the very most successful conference, and most important, I look forward to the conversation continuing. Thank you very much.
Before I move on, I would also like to recognize two more people, examples of what I'm talking about. Commissioner Van White is here as well, and also our Police Chief James Shepard. The Rochester City School District is also partnering with NYU Metropolitan Center for Urban Education and to hold this event. And our next speakers up here will be Dr. Edward Fergus and Dr. Yemi Stenbridge.
Good morning, everyone. We are so excited to be able to have this partnership with the superintendent and the city of Rochester. My name is Edward Fergus, and I'm the deputy director at the Metropolitan Center for Urban Education. Our center, run by our executive director, Pedro Noguera, who I'm sure has been up here quite a few times, and who I had told me when I spoke to him the other day that we were coming up here to help Jean-Claude to launch this initiative, to send his regards, but also to commit to coming back to when we finish our series of work over the next 6 to 7 months to help do the reconvening of this group and actually do a further kickoff with you all. So I wanted to publicly say that because that's the way to hold him accountable, if you all know my boss. the Metropolitan Center, we've been doing this work focused on males of color particularly throughout the country. There have been a couple of endeavors that have really been significant for us and that have really signaled sort of the way in which we really approach this work. One of those pieces of work that we've been involved with is with the California Endowment, which is one of the largest foundations out in California, that unlike any other foundation that we've ever interacted with, have made a 10-year commitment to this population in California in 14 communities. And not only do they make a commitment in terms of as it being part of their funding trajectory, but also in terms of outlining what are the ways in which we're going to fix the problem. And so one of the things that they did was to do a call to action agenda for these next 10 years. And we worked with them over the last year in building that along with a lot of other entities. And we're going to borrow from that effort that they did because it was one of the few opportunities that we've had to actually get together with such a large cross-section of individuals who do practice-based work, who do community health work, who do policing work, who do public health work and education, to really sit and talk about what need to be the policy and practice targets that we have to attack in order to improve these particular outcomes. But what was particularly important for us, and that has always been a driving force in how we do our work in thinking about males of color, is that we can get lost not only in the numbers, but we can, over time, start thinking that the problem lies within the individuals. And our perspective and our work is going to drive around that in order for us to think about the individual, we also have to treat the system in which the individual has to live in, right? So so as you're looking at the data today, I don't want you to think about sort of, well, what's wrong with this population, but rather what's happened to this population, okay? Really change that orientation of that question. We're not going to be asking what's wrong with with black men and boys, but actually asking what's happened to them in the sets of systems that they actually have been walking in and out of for the various stages of their lives. And that's a very different orientation in exploring this. So our work with the school district, we're really going to be paying attention to how this is happening in three particular arenas: education, healthcare, and criminal justice. Okay? Now, obviously there are others. We can focus on public health issues. We can also focus on labor and employment, right? But we got to start somewhere. Okay? And those are three areas that we decided that we want to start here. And we're excited to really launch this with you all. So today, we're going to have a series of presentations, because one of the things that we want to make sure that we're all on the same page in understanding the severity of the issue. Okay? So there's no mistaking, well, I heard that this is what's happening, or I heard that no. We're all on the same page in understanding the outcome. And then we're going to spend our time understanding how did we get to those particular types of outcomes. And it's going to really require that all of you participate. So after we go through these presentations today, we're actually going to go into breakout rooms. And you're going to do what we call tell the story behind the numbers. You all have the knowledge base in understanding how these numbers have come to be what they are, and can actually tell in some ways, sometimes maybe linear, sometimes a roundabout way, tell those sets of causes that have led to those outcomes. So in those breakout sessions, myself, Dr. Stembridge, and Dr. Jean-Pierre are going to facilitate each of those groups to make sure that we get as much information from you all in moving this agenda forward. After today, the other piece of the work begins, where we're going to be holding work group sessions every month on these topics, because we need to not only, once we identify what may be some of the policy and practice issues, we're going to drill down to specificity as to how it actually is affecting various populations of this particular population. Because at the end of this 6 to 7 month road, we're going to identify what need to be the policy and practice targets for Rochester City. And that's just the beginning. Then we really have to do it. Because it's one thing to take this, to feel good about having met and define targets. It's another thing to actually do something about it. I sit on the Juvenile Justice Advisory Group for the state, and we met, was that yesterday? No, day before. And we look at all the juvenile justice data for the entire state, and with the Commissioner of Corrections, with the Commissioner of OCFS, and the Department of Criminal Justice, and with the various judges throughout the state. And it's daunting to see those sets of numbers, because predominantly the population is male, predominantly it is black. And to sit in a room with individuals who also represent the various systems, we've been struggling in identifying what need to be the policy and practice targets for us to change this trajectory happening with this population. So I'm excited that Rochester is taking that effort on as well, because it can't be a state effort, it has to be a city effort as well. And the school district can't do it alone. The school district cannot do it alone, and the school district can't be held accountable. We all have to be held accountable in terms of doing this work moving forward. So as much as some of us may want to sit and critique, and as much as you critique, you also have to offer suggestions. And that's not easy, because sometimes we can get mired in critiquing and not come up with a solution, right? As much as I hate zero tolerance policies, I have to come up with a suggestion, right? Because I know it's disproportionate effect with this population, but I can't critique without coming up with a suggestion. So we all have to hold ourselves accountable. So we look forward to this endeavor with you all today, and I'm going to turn this over to Wakili. Thank you.
Okay. The breakout sessions were mentioned. I'll mention this at the end as well. But there will be there's 4 presentations in 3 breakout rooms. The education breakout will be right here in this room. The criminal justice will be in the Wells Brown room across the hall. And then the healthcare will be in the Gamble room, 3rd floor, go by the circulation desk and then the elevator. But again, I'll mention that at the end. Our next speaker comes from the Finger Lakes Health Systems Agency, Public Health Issues and Black Males, Mr. Wade Norwood.
Good morning, and thank you very much. I am delighted to be here, and I am going to try and set the right stage of not talking at great length, but sharing with you some of the data and the observations that will help fuel the conversation. Before I begin, I would like to first of all thank Reverend Nicholas for his leadership in making sure that Superintendent Brizard and I made this happen. Thank you, Rev. 5 years ago, when I met Reverend Nicholas, this is what he said he envisioned taking place, and it is a delight to see it. I would like to secondly give honor to you educators in the room and to you clergy. I'm at this amazing point in my life where, in addition to doing healthcare, I'm a member of the Board of Regents, and I am a pastor locally. And it is very clear to me that my faith journey and education are the path to healing. And so the fact that we have Reverend clergy, very good to see you, Reverend Hunt, that we have Reverend clergy in the room with educators, I think is an important way to heal. And then thirdly, before I begin, I'm going to say that I am also delighted that when I leave out after presenting, I'm leaving you in the company of my wife. And my wife is serious about this issue. We walked in this morning saying we met here in the Rush Reeves Library. And we are committed to making sure that young people in the city of Rochester, particularly African-American boys, make it. That's why our sofa and our floors are always filled with children who don't belong to us, because they belong to us. And we have to be Harriet Tubman and help our young people make it to the freedom of educational achievement. I'm going to talk very briefly about the topics laid up. I'm Director of Community Engagement for the Finger Lakes Health Systems Agency, which is the regional health planning entity for our 9-county Finger Lakes region. And as we have looked at the population and the health system needs of this community, what is very clear to us is that there must be particular attention paid to the real and pressing health disparities that exist in our community. There are differences in health status and health outcomes that cannot be explained away by any other factor than race. It is not education, it is not income, it is not any of those nice things we would like to say it is. There are racial disparities, not only in this nation, but here in the city of Rochester. The demographics you guys know, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time belaboring it, but it's important to understand that in our community, the majority of African Americans live in Monroe County, particularly within the city of Rochester. And it is also no great surprise to anybody that poverty disproportionately impacts African Americans and Latinos in our community. But I think what we have to stay very focused on is the fact that race and poverty intersect geographically. And if we map, and we have mapped here for you, socioeconomic status in this community, which is race, income, education, employment, what we find is that the worst off in our community are of color, and they are concentrated in specific neighborhoods. This is the point that Dr. Fergus was just making. What we know about the determinants of health, health is not determined by biology or by connectivity with the medical system. Those things only account for 40% of the reasons why people die earlier than they should. 60% of the determinants of health, when measured by all causes of premature mortality, are environment and behavior. Environment, 20%. Behavior, 40%. What I say when I'm out on the stump is environment and behavior forms culture, because our environment is made up of our collective behavior, and our collective behavior will determine our environment. When my son was a middle schooler at the School of the Arts on the east side of town, he went to school wearing Dockers and a polo shirt. When he went to high school at Wilson Magnet in the Southwest where we lived, he no longer was bused, he had to walk. And what happened within 4 weeks is homeboy's wardrobe changed. He started going to school with baggy, saggy jeans, a hoodie, a do-rag, and a baseball cap. And I said to Lisa, keep your mouth shut and pick your battles. Leave him alone, because what he did was he adapted his behavior to his environment. It was a necessary and rational response for him to be able to walk up Genesee Street and back down Genesee Street safely each day. I would he had gone to school every day in high school dressed the way I am today. But what I had to concede to him is I dress the way I do because of my environment. And our saving grace was when he graduated and came here to the University of Rochester, you know what happened to his wardrobe? It changed again. Your environment will shape your behavior. And behavior has major consequences for your health. And the point I want to leave with you in my brief time here is we have to understand our health outcomes are different because our environment is different. Our environment is different. It's because by and large we packed into these red areas. And them red areas are very different than the rest of the community. And as a result, health outcomes look different. Really different. And my favorite measure of looking at health outcomes is this chart here, which is years of potential life lost. I like this because this not only looks at death rates from disease, but it takes into account the age at which someone dies. My Nana dying at 94 was a far different thing than my dad dying at 63. My dad died of his third heart attack. So he would be in that line of years of potential life lost. And that means I have a whole bunch of young men in my family who are growing up without a grandfather. I have a mother who's going through her second half of life as a widow. What I like about years of potential life loss is that it allows us to understand the real impact of disease within a community. And it makes us think, as Dr. Fergus said, about the story behind the story. It makes us think, as Dr. Seligman said, about the faces. And as you can see, it really doesn't matter what the disease condition is. In this community, the burden of disease falls disproportionately and unfairly on communities of color. And I want to call particular attention today to that perinatal conditions and the homicide line. And when I wrap up, I'm going to call particular attention to that HIV line. What could we be doing? Number one, we know health insurance has a major impact on people's ability to get care when they know they need it. Although we have public insurance in New York State, Child Health Plus, 1/3 of the children who are Child Health Plus eligible are not enrolled. The president's expansion of health care is only going to exacerbate the number of folk who should be covered but ain't covered. We have work to do. We know that people who cannot afford care delay care. And so when they do get care, they are sicker than they would otherwise be and cost us more as a society to heal. Language is another barrier. And do not think English proficiency is now limited only to those who speak a language other than English in the home. Because of the fact that we are now compounding generations of low educational attainment, we have limited English proficiency even among those for whom English is a first language. And the medical world is a complex world. I say to folks all the time, and I told my doctor he need to know I'm talking about him. My doctor spent 8 visits talking to me about, Wade, you need to cut down on salt. I'm saying to him, Doc, I don't use salt. We don't use it cooking. We don't have it at the table any day other than Thanksgiving. He kept saying, you got to cut down on salt. It wasn't until counseling session number 8 with my high blood pressure that he said, you got to do something about sodium. Doc, you ain't never talked about sodium before. If it go past my head, what's it doing for everybody else? We also know, thanks to the Dartmouth Atlas, that there are gold standard tests of medical and procedures in medical care that are unimpeachable in terms of defining quality of care. For diabetics, every diagnosed diabetic should get regular blood sugar tests. That's what hemoglobin A1C is. Should have retinal eye exams to make sure that there's no atrophy within the eye and to make sure that cholesterols are checked. That's blood lipids. But yet, when we pour through the utilization of Medicare enrollees, what we see is there is a disparity between those gold standard tests when the diabetic is black as opposed to when they are white. I'm not saying it's the doctor's fault. I'm not saying it's the patient's fault. But what I'm saying is something that's rotten in Denmark, and it's time for us to do something about it, because if not us, then who? This is one of my favorite charts. It's the rate at which their diabetic patients have leg amputation or lower leg extremity amputations. A couple of summers ago, we were all scandalized in the news when Chicago released a study saying that their amputation disparity rate was 4-to-1, that blacks in Chicago are 4 times more likely when they are diabetic to have their feet or toes cut off than white diabetics are. As you can see in our community, amen. What we do is we really force the conversation about the data to really get to the truth. And one of the things that we discover is that when we look at emergency department use, if you look at adults aren't going to the emergency department in the middle of the night. They're going in the middle of the day. And by and large, when we peel by address, those middle of the day visits are suburban males going to the emergency department. Inner city usage is children going in those hours of early evening and the middle of the evening. And what we find is we listen to the parents of your students, is those are parents coming home from work with sick children, trying to figure out what are we going to do with tomorrow. And so I'm going to come back to Dr. Fergus's comment. And I'm going to be very clear on what we have to do is look at environmental change. And environmental change means public policy and systems change. Quite honestly, most of the major improvements in health in this society have occurred when we recognize that health is not a reflection of the choices people make, but rather a reflection of the choices that people have. I'm going to skip that chart for the interest of time and just simply say our work. That chart is the Wagner Care Model, which simply says if you're going to address health improvement, you got to use more than medicine. You got to use the community. And I don't need to preach that to y'all because you all as a district, the leadership of your superintendent and board was instrumental in listening to the voice of the community. One of the things that we found very true and pressing was one of the reasons we had bad nutrition was kids were loading up on junk food because of their perception that school lunch is gross. And the voice of the community said, you know what, why can't city school lunch look more like suburban school lunch? And in tough budget years, this administration and this school board took the issue seriously. And with advocacy, we were able to get an increase in the food service operating budget, an increase in the capital budget to address the needs of Central Kitchen, and a new food service contractor. That's how you use non-health solutions to address the health problem of the growing rate of obesity and overweight among our children, which then leads upscale to the growing rate of diabetes and high blood pressure within our population. Right now, the superintendent and the district building leaders are very focused on the value of recess, of getting time for kids to run their hormones and their silliness out. And we as parents have to start giving you the courage to say, it ain't all about the test scores. And if it takes some time away from exam drill, it's okay if it means healthier children. It's time for us to have a serious conversation to say if we have essentially made gonorrhea and chlamydia African-American diseases here in Monroe County, then for heaven's sake and for the sake of the children, let's make sure that there is real, comprehensive health education, meaningful sex education, and let's have the courage to say that there's a need to get condoms into their hands. I'm a minister of the gospel, my friends. I believe in mortifying our members so that we can set our affections on things above, but I also believe that life is better than death, and I believe that having intelligent conversation is more important than silence or ignorance. Our children are perishing because of the lack of knowledge. We have a responsibility to get serious and to do it now. And I salute the board. I salute this superintendent for having the wisdom, I'll say it the way St. Francis said, the courage to change the things we can, the serenity to accept the things we can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. I hope you all would join in and help us gain greater wisdom. Thank you very much. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Norwood. Our next speaker is from Rochester Institute of Technology, Center of Public Safety Initiatives, and it's Janelle Duda.
I have no idea how to follow Wade Norwood, but I will try. I will share with you the data that we have available to us. Again, I'm a researcher at the Center for Public Safety Initiatives. I work very closely with John Clofus, and I do want to say that I am honored to be here. I'm very excited about where this conversation leads us to. I am even more excited about the follow-up that will be happening. So I want to start with just sharing some national data. I'm not going to spend very much on this, but I want to make sure that we start off on the same page. There's more than 2 million Americans, or 2 million people incarcerated in the United States today. About 40% of those who are incarcerated are African Americans. And African Americans, you probably all know, make up only 13% in the general population. So we have to think about that. 1 in 9 African American males aged 25 to 29 today are incarcerated. A black male born in 2001 has a 32% chance of being locked up in prison at some point in their lifetime if we continue along these current trends that we are heading towards today. African Americans are overrepresented in drug arrests. Some studies have found that African Americans African Americans in self-reported surveys have constitute about 14% of drug users. However, when we look at actual arrest data, African Americans represent 53% of drug convictions, 35% of those arrested for drug offenses, and 45% of drug offenders in prison. African American youth represent 17% of the general population. However, they represent 46% of juvenile arrests, 31% of referrals to juvenile court, and 41% of waivers to adult court. Black youth serve life without parole sentences at 10 times the rate of white youth. And lastly, African Americans are less likely than whites to receive a sentence that keeps them in their community with community program and community supervision, and instead are incarcerated. And so that's the national data. There's a lot more out there. It's very accessible to get your hands on this data, but I'm here to talk about, and I think everyone is here today to talk about Rochester, and how can we find meaning out of national data, and what does it look like in Rochester, in our neighborhoods, in our cities. See if I can, all right. If you can take one thing away from what I tell you today, take this chart away. After I explain it, I really hope this resonates with people. The homicide rate nationally is 8 per 100,000. There's no such thing as a national person, a national city. That doesn't really have that much meaning to us here in Rochester. What does it mean to live in Rochester? Well, it means that the homicides in Rochester are actually concentrated in specific neighborhoods. And these are the neighborhoods that are our poorest neighborhoods and our neighborhoods that have the highest numbers of minorities living in them. So to look at this chart, each bar is a subset of the previous bar. So the U.S. rate of the homicide rate in the United States is 8 per 100,000. In Rochester as a whole, it's actually 25 per 100,000. So we already have a high violence in this city. But then if you look at young Black American males, the rate is 147 per 100,000, and then going all the way down to the bottom, in high crime neighborhoods in our cities, that rate is 520 per 100,000. That's epidemic proportions. Think about what that means for a 20-year-old black male walking out of his house. Think about what it means if he gets in an argument, maybe something over a girlfriend. He's at such a greater risk of something fatal happening than I am. And you don't even know what neighborhood I live in, but you can tell that I'm a white female. One thing that I wanted to do was, I was trying to figure out if I wanted to talk about maybe the causes of racial disparity in the criminal justice system. And there's two things that I would like to highlight, mainly for the interest in time. But I just want to say that what's happened is we've left social problems to be solved by the criminal justice system in low-income neighborhoods. And so when that happens, the criminal justice system is going to use what resources they have. And the resources that they have include enforcement and arrest and incarceration. So for example, we have people in these communities who have addictions to drugs. And instead of them having the treatment in their neighborhoods that's culturally competent, that's accessible to them, instead, we're arresting the problem away. We're having police make these arrests, these nonviolent arrests, and then people are getting criminal records, and we all know what happens when someone gets a criminal record. And the second thing I want to say, which I'm not really going to elaborate on, is inequitable access to resources. I don't want to say much about that other than I hope that today in our breakout groups, I hope that we talk about access. I hope that we define it, and I hope that we know what that means. Because I talk about access in a different way than the person next to me does. But access includes culturally competent practices. It includes the supervisors buying into this. It includes it being in the neighborhoods. It includes the people who are in these agencies looking like the people in the neighborhoods. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is what the criminal justice, the effect the criminal justice system has on the neighborhood directly. So what we did was we wanted to see, well, how many people coming from certain neighborhoods, or from all the neighborhoods in the city, how many are on parole, are on probation, are in jail, are in prisons? And so 3 neighborhoods popped up: 14605, 14613, 14621. I think everybody in this room doesn't find that surprising. 14605, Market Heights area, 14613, Edgerton, 14621 is the neighborhood in between them, Northeast area. So I'll briefly explain what you should get out of this chart is that in 14605, 1 out of every 3 young black males is under some form of criminal justice supervision. Now, young is 20 to 49. Just keep that in mind. 1 out of every 3. 14613, 1 out of every 5. 14621, 1 out of every 4. So this is normal. Now, this is what's happened now. We've made interactions with the criminal justice system normal in these neighborhoods. So what does that impact on families? Well, you have income loss, you have family disruption, you have lower job prospects, you have a growing population of incarcerated parents, you have an overall lower quality of life. Now, the last part of this is, so we looked at this, and to be honest, we were shocked when we saw this. But then we thought about it, and then we realized, all of you, I'm sure, interact with kids who live in these neighborhoods. And anyone that you speak to either knows someone who's been a victim of a violent crime, or incarcerated, on probation. So this is normal. And so we also said, well, so what's going on, and what do those neighborhoods look like as far as gender and kids? And so the first two charts that I want to show you are actually different, are not these zip codes. The first community, the next charts I'm showing you are actually available on zipcodedata.com. But this is a chart showing the distribution of residents' ages in a zip code in the suburbs. So, for example, so you have here the pink are females, red represent males. And so the way that I would describe this chart is that there's a good number of kids, and then at about age, I know it's hard to see this in the back and I apologize, at about age 18, 17, 18, there's a steep decline. And then there's a steady increase at around age 30 to 35. And then there's a slow decline once you get past 45, 50 years old. So I would say that what's going on in this neighborhood is that there's a number of kids, a number of parents, and then at about 18, these kids are graduating from high school and they're moving on to college. And then they move off to New York City, to Chicago, to other cities, and then they decide to move back to where their family is. And they move back in and they start their own family. This is Webster. This next one is a zip code in the city. This is a neighborhood in the city. How I would describe this one are not very many kids at all, a ton of 20 to 30-year-olds, and then a steep decline and not very many people who are older age. This is Park Ave. So this is 14605. A lot of kids. Look at this gap between females and males. And for those in the back, there's this huge gap right here. Where are all the men? Yep. 14613 tells a very similar story. 14621, again, more children than adults in these neighborhoods. So, what I want to, in closing, what I'd like to say is that this is the first step in this conversation, and recognizing that there's more to it than just knowing, okay, we have a disproportionate amount of black men who are incarcerated, who are part of the criminal justice system. Well, we have women and mothers and grandmothers in these neighborhoods without the men. And we have a ton of kids running around who don't have these male role models for them. And I don't want to jump to solutions because I'm thinking that I'm hoping we'll get there in the breakout groups, but unique to specific to the criminal justice system, we really need to keep in mind that discretion is really crucial, a critical element in the criminal justice system at every stage. So from just simply deciding, well, where does the police department want to allocate the resources? What areas are they going to police? From the police officer on the street deciding, do I want to arrest this person? They did commit a crime, do I want to arrest them? There's discretion at and we can go up. Discretion is really, really important to take a look at and to make sure that it's well monitored, held accountable, and that it's well informed. So in closing, I just want to say that we know the data speaks for itself, but recognizing that, as Malik said, we have these, the data are not people. We know now what neighborhoods we need to target. We know now what it looks like. So now what can we do? Thank you.
Okay, so looking at those numbers, you see, we already knew there was an issue, but you see definitely how serious this is. So you agree we definitely have to come up with a plan, correct? Yeah, definitely. Our next speaker is William Gargan from the Felony Bureau, Chief, Monroe County District.
First of all, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to not speak after Wade Norwood. I'm going to echo the previous academician who had a chance to speak as well. I also feel somewhat as you have paid money for a Broadway show. The star, Mike Green, is not here. I am the understudy. but I'm not the understudy because I hadn't been preparing on the off chance he had not been here. So I just offer that up first. I am woefully inadequate to be somebody that can speak to you about black boys and black men in this city. And I say that in the sense of I am a grandson of a woman born in Ireland. I am the grandson of a grandfather born in Ireland. I am somehow now an American, completely American. About 1,000 years of Roman Catholic history has been entrenched in my family. I married a Presbyterian woman of British descent because I'm an American now. I'm here to talk about my perspective. Again, my perspective. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you what you should do, because you each know so much more than I could ever know about black boys and black men in this city. But I can just tell you, I have been employed in the criminal justice system for 13 years. Is demographic destiny? I embody many of the stereotypes of an Irish Catholic American because my father was in law enforcement. My grandfather was in law enforcement. My great-grandfather was in law enforcement because that's what they knew. So that's what I knew. Had they been butchers, I might be a butcher right now. So this is what I knew. Now, I can tell you, for me, I got my money's worth as an audience member from hearing Dr. Fergus. When he said, we're not going to talk about the community, about what's wrong with them, what has gone wrong with them. We're going to change that paradigm and say, what has happened to them in the systems? Now, I'm standing in the back right there. And again, I've had a fascinating, let's say, 18 hours when I found out I'd be speaking today. I mean, fascinating. I called a good friend of mine and I said, tell me again, how come you are not here speaking? I happen to be good friends with a judge in Rochester City Court. His name is Steve Miller. We went to law school together. We started in the DA's office together. Good friend of mine. I called him last night. I get this text on the phone. I'm on the phone with the victim. It's about 9 o'clock at night. And I'm sitting there and I pick it up and I see it's him. And it's a text one saying, brother, I'm sorry I'm not getting to you right now. I'll talk to you later. I'm in church right now. And I'm thinking, I just got to bounce some ideas off someone. So he laughed when I told him I was going to be here today. He had a good laugh just sharing with me. And he just talked about it. He said, look, tell what you've observed. Just tell what you've seen. And again, it's this conversation because look, I am part of the criminal justice system. But I am also a city resident, a father, an American. But American, I own this culture of America. Yet I've only been here 2 generations. So I read books about the history. That's not even really my history. I mean, it's my history because I've been here for 2 generations. Yet I am fully invested. Anybody looks at me, oh, you are, of course you're American. I'm white, I'm Irish American. These are the little hyphenates that have certain value. But as a member of the criminal justice system, I can tell you anecdotally, because that's what I can provide, that there is not the thought process of our African American boys and men, are they being unfairly treated? The conversation isn't part of the action. And sometimes I think of that as if I were a soldier for an army. I am not thinking about what I am attempting to do because I don't have the luxury of thought. There's an assistant public defender back there, named JB. I know that if he spoke, he would talk about the fact that the volume of cases that your public servants handle, it's crushing. The amount is so great. The conversation to be had is a difficult one, to step back and think. We had an academician speak before me, and she spoke about the trends and studying. I can tell you that if you look at your assistant district attorneys, if you look at your assistant public defenders, it's a funnel that comes in every day, the crimes. And you have to respond every day, and you do individually as best you can, but you rarely step back and look at that big picture to say, let me look at demographics here. Let me look at where the defendants are here. Let me look at where the victims are here. Because there are several things obviously going through my mind when we discuss about this. And I think, if Chief Shepard's still here, I think about the obligation of an urban police force to respond to crime. And I think about how often, I have held the hands or sat next to and been privileged to become part of somebody's life in the worst time in the world because their son, their daughter, their brother, their father has been killed, has been robbed, has been shot at. And if you sat in and you look in the black-on-black crime that comes in there, you start thinking about the criminal justice system, its disproportionality and its impact. Yet you stop and think again, well, the conversation we need to have sometimes is, what do we do with the person that shoots somebody? What do we do with the person that kills someone? Think back again, Dr. Fergus said, what has happened to them in the systems? And I fear that the conversation that we must have now is one that hopefully bears fruit down the road. Because the fact that right now you have family members of the communities of color that demand from us, what are you doing to prevent this? What are you doing to punish him? What are you doing to prosecute this guy? He killed my son. He stabbed my wife. These are the sort of things that don't allow you that sense of distance to think about what is going on with this community. Now, I think about one time I was at a bench conference with Dr. King. Dr. King was, I believe, the second African-American judge in Rochester City Court. And I was up there and he was talking to somebody, another defense attorney. And the defense attorney asked him, Judge, when did you want to become a judge? And again, I'm just an ADA, just there at my files, and so I'm privileged just to listen to. And he said, when I started to represent the third generation of a family, I realized this is enough. This is enough. I've been racking my brains thinking about, what do I think about as a prosecutor? Because again, it's a hat that I wear, and it's one that also is one of several hats. I live in the city. I'm a parent. I think about these things. I think about the review. I don't know if you've heard about a recent book, Disintegration, The Splintering of Black America by Eugene Robinson. It's a book that just came out, and he more or less says, Black America doesn't exist anymore like it used to. It's divided into 4 parts right now. The transcendent ones, those that are known by their first names, the transcendent. The black middle class, which according to his research now accounts for the majority of Black Americans. You have the emergent class, those that are of mixed race or of recent immigrant status. But then he has the reason why we're here today. And that is the category he calls the abandoned. The abandoned. Now we're talking about it because it is clustered here. But I can talk about the fact that if we look at crime in America, we also know that this impacts rural whites as well. We look at the southern tier in this state. We look at some of the rural communities here. You can see the same pathologies that impact, but the numbers aren't the same in terms of concentration, in terms of lethality. But we talk about the abandoned. That's a frightening phrase to hear about, the abandoned. To talk about those that are being just fundamentally passed beyond. I think about a demographic that I read a while ago, and it stayed with me. And I think about it with each crime that comes across my desk, and that is that in America, there are 3 things that you must do to be successful. If you can do these 3 things, then you are by and large going to be on a path to success. And I think about that because every day when I get the new felonies that come into my bureau, I am a funnel. Felonies come to me, I assign them to ADAs that work for me as to how to appropriately, I get something called a PDR, Prisoner Data Report. And I look at that at every single nonviolent felony that comes in. And I think about in the back of my head the 3 things that we're told in America you must do to be successful. 1 is you graduate from high school. This PDR tells me the top level education they have. 2, you must not have children until you are married. 3, you don't marry until you're in your 20s. If you can do those 3 things, essentially, you're going to be on a path to get out of those violent years, get out of those nonsense years, and be on a path to success. So I get to look at every day, what is the level of education? Then I get to see mother and father, and you could see the number of unknowns for father, prison for father, mother, name, unknown, address. And you think, this is a Holocaust. What do you do when you realize that somebody who's 18, has got 2 kids, been arrested 4 times already? This is what the criminal justice system is now. Congratulations, it's in your lap. Because this is now my file. I own this now. And when you constantly think about as an ADA, and you think about sometimes with medicine, you'll talk to doctors practice defensive medicine. because of the fact that they fear being sued for malpractice. So they order tests that maybe they may not want to do. But they're going to do it. You sometimes can have, and I think it can be subconsciously, but you think of an ADA practicing defensive prosecution. And what I mean by that is this: do I want to take a chance on this guy? Do I want to go out on a limb and give him, and I use the word him, that's the reason we're here, but the numbers show that the majority of criminals accused are men. Do I want to go out on a limb for him? And let me tell you, do you know what the risk reward is there? There was a guy in the community, it was about 8 years ago, his name was Peter Thousand. He was a Caucasian male, and he had been arrested for several crimes. And the ADA who handled that case agreed with defense counsel, I will let him plea, but then I will give him a furlough. A furlough. I will let him out for several weeks before he is to be sentenced to his term of incarceration. You know what Peter Thousand did in those 2 weeks? He committed multiple burglaries. Multiple burglaries. Do you know what that did to every ADA in that office? Who was maybe asked by a defense attorney, look, can you give him 2 weeks to get the affairs in order? Can you allow him to just go home? Discretion. Dr. Duda just said before, there is discretion in every layer. There is an offer that a defense counsel is given that is too good an offer to pass up because of the fact that it is perhaps a misdemeanor, not a felony. It is perhaps a low-grade felony, not a violent felony. There are reasons that it should be taken because the defendant has committed the crime, let's say. But then are you going to commit a furlough on that? Are you going to give a chance to somebody? Because let me tell you, when that happens, and again, Mike Green is not here. He's going to hopefully become a federal judge soon, and I say that because he's been nominated by the Senate. I mean, the White House has put forward his name. He is somebody whose schedule kind of changes all the time, but it is an elected office. It's every 4 years. It's every 4 years. And I know that when he had run, let's say, the first time, there was an issue because there was a man of color who had killed a Caucasian male in the city, and he had been released. He had been arrested for a drug crime, just a little bit. That became an issue. That became fodder for politics. So your prosecutor is an elected official. And you've got to think, what is going to be utilized to get the votes of those? And you're going to think about if a decision, and it turns out that he was released because of the fact that he had been arrested. If you know what a drug house is, sometimes if they go in, they're going to arrest everybody in there. But you know what? You really have a case maybe against one person. But everybody's in there, so everybody gets arrested. Well, that ADA who had that case realized that there's not a good case against this young man. I'm not going to try to keep him incarcerated. I'm not going to try to prosecute him for him because it's not a good case. But that is not something that was explained to John Q. Public or potential voters. So you have to think discretion. Is an ADA somebody who wants to take a chance? Is this person on the path to the mistake that was made? And I'm going to regret this. It was a mistake. Or is it on the path to the career criminal? That's where the question becomes. What I hope, what I think, in discussing here, what I'm excited about is the concept of thinking we are trying to address a problem that strikes every single city in America. Every single one, much as Dr. Brizard is attempting in every single effort and every single day to address urban schooling. It's a problem that afflicts every single city in our country. Yet the hope is you can try something different because everything else has been tried. So this could be a laboratory. We can take advantage of the skill set of NYU. We can take advantage of the genius that's here. We can take advantage and try something different. I want to share with you just a thought that I've had, only because of the fact that if it's of value, then it could go somewhere. If it's not, then it'll be shunted aside, and then we'll quicker on the next one. But we have police officers that are in the schools. There are resource officers in the schools, and there's value to that. But what we don't have are employees of the schools maybe in the courts. Now, I say that right now. There is a son of Wilson. He is a Wilson Wildcat that is Judge Miller, my friend. He arraigns every single felony that is in Monroe County. Every single day, every felony comes before him, there is a request. Is there going to be bail? That discretion, that decision is made by him every day. Every day. And I always think that there is a pretrial program to see if somebody is eligible. Is there a contact? We don't want to fill people in jails. Can we let them out? Well, I've always thought, are there two other things that could happen? Because if you remember 30 years ago, the judge used to give the option, you can go into the Army or you can go to jail. And many a man went into the Army, and his life was better for it because he got that chance. But the choice was given by the judge there. The judge has that power right there. Well, I've always thought about, what if we had two people in the court every day, a representative from the school and a computer every day? So when the judge sees you, how old are you, son? This age. Okay, what school do you go to? Again, it's in the city, so predominantly we're going to have members of the city school district. Well, I've got somebody from the school district right now. Can you pull up his grades right now? Can you pull up how many times he's been absent? Can you pull up how many times he's been suspended? Right now. Okay? And then you know what happens right there? What does that 16-year-old got to say? You're not supposed to know about that. You know, you're not supposed to know about that. You know, the judge just looks at the member of the school and says, Your Honor, I can tell you that he is a student in this standing. I can tell you the grades he achieved last year with this. And I want to picture Judge Miller looking at him going, are you kidding me? That's the best you're doing here? All right, here's what's going to happen. I'm not going to set bail right now. I'm going to go ahead and set pretrial release. But you know what the condition of that is right now? That condition is when you return in 2 weeks, the gentleman or the lady that's right there from the school district, you know what she or he is going to tell me? You have been to school every day. There is not a negative mark on there. Because again, showing up, you know, that's half the battle. But my friend, that is not enough. If we are, again, using that phrase, defining deviancy down, congratulations, you've shown up to school. Maybe the judge will make him kind of do something more because there is that sense of discretion that that judge has. Now, that's the one program, but let's say if I have the other program, the gentlemen that are not in school anymore, but let's say they've got their GED. So I've got 18, 19, 20, because this conversation is not just about African-American boys, it's about men. But congratulations, I get these healthy specimens that are in court all the time. Okay, you're unemployed. What are you doing there? Now, you think about what President Roosevelt did in the 30s when men needed work. And I say men because that was the way society was then. Well, we have a problem right now, and it warrants perhaps that same level of intervention. Why don't we have somebody in court right there who's got the job training program right now? Right there. Would you like to learn a trade right now? Because I've got somebody right there who represents the unions, represents labor, is there funding that can exist right now to say, congratulations, you're out on bail for the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but now you get to go here. We have a program right now where for pretrial release where you get to go and sit in a room all day. Day reporting. Okay, you sit in a room. Again, it's cheaper than going to jail, but you're not doing anything. You're not learning anything. And you know you're hanging out with, right? Yeah, people that are there for a reason, too. So you get to learn the trade. I love the tricks of the trade. I mean, I love those guys. I mean, I love to get to meet people from there, and you know what you're talking about. Hey, come here. You know what I do? What do you do? Okay, let me tell you about this one. This is great. I mean, it's, you know, fantastic. Well, how about we have the next step, which is, okay, you know who you're going to hang around with during the day when you're out? You're going to hang around people that are working, that got this skill. And I think about this because those slides that were there, what I see in the PDRs, I see of how many people come in here that are members of the tribe of the fatherless. The tribe of the fatherless. Father isn't there. And I think in my own life, every job I got was because my dad knew someone. I didn't know anything. What do I know? How am I going to get a job? Who's going to hire me? None of these jobs exist. I drive around all the time. And every time I see somebody with a job, I go, how did that guy get that job? How do you even know that that job existed? You know, the guy with the flag, with the construction, you know? Stands there. I always think about him. I go, boy, I love that job. I would love that job. I go, how did he get that job? I think about because he knew somebody who had that job. That's how you get that job. Well, if the tribe of the fatherless right now means that you don't have somebody who helps you get that job, well, you've got to substitute it. When Wade Norwood said the kids that aren't mine, well, they are mine. Well, we've got these people, and we know. And I think this can appeal, and this can appeal to members of the left, it appeals to members of the right, because the fact that you save money when you make taxpayers. That's what job training is. You create taxpayers. It's fantastic. You give somebody a skill, give somebody a job, put it in a field in which you cannot replace it, cannot be outsourced. But how are you going to learn that? Well, maybe in court every day. We have representatives from the school, we have representatives from the trades, or somebody who says, I've got this program. So when you come back in 2 weeks, because that does two things. One, that defense attorney can make a pitch to that ADA and say, look what he's doing. Look how he's been. Look at the steps that have been taken. If you provide him that structure, if you provide him that input, he can achieve. And that's going to be something starkly different because you're asking that ADA to take a chance on somebody, to take a chance on me. And again, it's an uncomfortable position to be in when you're a prosecutor and you are responding to phone calls from members of the clergy, members of the community, to say, will you take a chance on him? And sometimes you say, Pastor, I can't, he robbed somebody. He went in with his brother. I think about this one case, I had 3 guys. They went and they robbed this young man and his girlfriend. They had just opened a store on Monroe Avenue. He was a parolee. This is the victim. My victim was a parolee, man of color from Niagara Falls. And he comes in, and these 3 guys, they rob this guy. It's a big gun. And there is a woman of color standing there with her baby, and she is in the front of the window, and a woman walks by walking her dog and mouths, "Are you okay?" Because she can see this look of distress. And the woman just mouths, "No." So this woman walks around the corner, and there's a member of the RPD right there. So they immediately seal this place off. And these 3 guys, they're done. They're a statistic. I'm the prosecutor. This one kid's the younger brother of his older brother who's already been in prison, who's hanging out with the guy he knows in prison. They're both on parole. So that younger brother, man, I gave him 5 years. That's the minimum. 5 years of prison. I've got a victim. I tell you, that store closed. They left. I'm not part of this anymore. This is just ugly. These are the consequences that are there. But we think about, I'm contributing to people being removed from that society, but I also have victims that are asking me, what are you doing? You would have killed me. You would have killed my wife. What happened to my child? These are tough, tough questions. We've got to figure out how to prevent somebody from being in that place. If we can get them that skill, if we can get them that degree, maybe they make that decision to say to their brother, I'm not going to go out there tonight. No, thank you. I'm going to take a pass on that. These are the moments that intersect like that create all the difference. These are just my thoughts. I think maybe one has merit, and that's all I could ask for, is to have a thought considered. So I thank you for your time.
Okay, last but not least, we have one more speaker before our breakout session. I'd like to thank this next person for making this happen, because I think we agree that we do a lot of talking over the years about this issue, but today's plan is to actually come up with a plan. And so I'm hoping that's what this outcome is. And it is our superintendent of the Rochester City School District, John Claude Brizard.
Good morning. So many people here I'd love to thank to actually help us make this come to fruition. Look at Elaine, who's sitting next to us over there, who started school this past September for boys who are coming out of jail in the city. Has been an unsung hero in pushing the work for us and the work that we are doing. I've been struggling to figure out how to start this conversation. I bring 25 years of experience to this work. I was teaching a long time ago at a place called Rikers Island in New York City. It's what sort of made me stay in this profession. Never wanted to be a teacher. I was a chemist. I loved what I was doing for a short amount of time. But when you see a need and you keep going back to it, and your parents or teachers, it sort of pushes you back to this conversation. 3 years ago, I told a lot of people to try and go beyond the headlines and seek to understand the initiative and the drive and what we're trying to do so people understand what the work is, because there's going to be blowback. There's going to be pushback. There's going to be noise. And I've been told a number of times, don't use the word noise, but sometimes it is noise, honestly. And when you're trying to do something, there are people who are detractors who will try to sway you and push you in a different direction. It's important as a community that we don't allow people to distract us from the work at hand. When you work in a jail, when you work with young men you see who are 16 years old who are facing 40 to life, you begin to understand the pre-work that has to be done for that not to happen. I come from a third world country, probably the poorest in the Western Hemisphere. I know what poverty looked like. I've been very fortunate. I was never poor. My parents were middle class. They were teachers. My father was an educator as well, a school principal. I never experienced poverty, but I lived, watched it. And I'm talking about abject poverty. I'm talking about perhaps even the kind you see in America, the kind where there is no soup kitchen. There is no place to go, where fathers are rummaging through garbage to find food for their children. That's the kind of poverty I'm talking about. We've seen it. And when you see our young men in jail, you begin to also understand what has to happen for them not to actually get there. You know, some of us call ourselves entrepreneurs in this work. Some of us call ourselves intrapreneurs in this work. I see myself as perhaps a ladder, because we work within a box that we try to reform. We try to change. We know it takes a community to actually improve education. Dr. Paul Hill talks about this on a regular basis. It takes a city, perhaps a county or a state or a nation to actually drive education. Trust that there is a movement now across this country that is looking to change the status quo, because we know that in the more affluent neighborhoods or communities or suburban areas, that there's a layer of accountability that exists from parents on teachers and principals and superintendents. They don't put up with nonsense. It may not say in the contract you've got to do this, but trust it's expected you're going to be doing that. In the poor neighborhoods, our kids don't have that kind of access or that kind of protection. So very often we have to be all for them. So we try to change the system from within. We try to push to create the kinds of innovation within the system as we advocate for the rest of the infrastructure to support the work that we do. I'm a big fan of the NYU Center because I know Pedro Noguera and what he does and what he talks about around the achievement gap. He's unabashed in terms of pushing the conversation. One of his organizations I would urge for you to take a look at is called A Broader, Bolder Approach to Education. It talks about what we have to do as a community to change this conversation. And before I jump into the data, the second thing I'd like to call your attention to, you got an executive summary when you're coming in. This was a report produced by the Council of the Great City Schools. And the title is A Call for Change, the Social and Educational Factors Contributing to the Outcomes of Black Males in Urban Schools. And this is a national piece that I would love for you to take a look at. You have the executive summary, but dig beyond it. So going back to the national conversation around education reform, the ed reform movement is gaining momentum and gaining steam in great part thanks to the work done by President Obama and his courage in trying to push this conversation. Trust there are some who will try to get him out of office when the next election comes along because he's been pushing hard with Arnie Duncan to actually get this to come. He is beginning to talk about, or many of us talking about, the one area that many of us often shy to talk about. We talk about accountability and transparency. It's easy to hold people like me accountable. It's easier to get principals to be held accountable, but very few of us talk about teacher accountability, all the adults who work in our schools, and have to hold them accountable. We have a system, folks, that does not work for urban schools, which is why you see some of the pushback and blowback. You heard Wade Norwood talk about the nutrition piece that we pushed a little while ago in the district, and Jerome is in the back there, who was instrumental in getting that to happen. You know what happened after we changed the menu and changed the rules? We had a protest at a board meeting. And one person I remember very clearly screaming, "Can you imagine if feeding those kids whole wheat pasta and low-fat cheese?" So I know in talking to some of my colleagues, and one principal guy here in the room was telling me he grew up eating a lot of sugar, and he's here. I'm not going to call him out. He said his wife is changing, is detoxing, basically what he's learned throughout his entire young life. And I'll tell you, even my wife right now does the same thing for me, trying to change my behavior around food and what I consider. I love sugar as well, too. I grew up around it as a Haitian. So a lot of that goes back to the work, and you've seen a lot of this conversation thus far. So I'm going to try and give you a gist of the conversation, but trust that what we are doing is about pushing this conversation. And very often you'll see a big headline, everyone gets worried about college readiness. We've been talking about this for 3 years. This is not new information, folks. 5% is not new. We've known about this. But I'm going to give you a slide I showed a couple weeks ago that shows you there's a bigger problem beyond kids being ready for college that we're not talking about. So I'm going to take you from the national and state national to local data very quickly. This was part of my school's address a couple of Thursdays ago. And the one piece I want to bring people to was this 13% on the far right. This is what we call persistence in college. You can get a kid into college, even with a 90 average. If they don't come back year 2, we got a problem. The fact is, of the Black and Latino males who graduate our schools in New York State, who actually get into college, only 3% come back year 2. They're dropping out for a number of reasons, mostly academic. They're not as prepared to handle the level of rigor in universities in colleges across New York State. That's the data point I call terrifying. because it means they're not graduating college. And I'll tell you, you get one African-American male from a poor neighborhood to graduate from college, you've changed the trajectory of an entire family. That's the work ahead for us. That's what we push. And as a city, and I'm going to blame a lot of us for this, we are fixated on one data point, graduation rate. And we've been saying to people, please stop talking about that because that means nothing. And yesterday, talking to Danny Wegman, we're going to be talking about changing the slogan for Hillside Works from graduation is the goal to something else. Because we know it's not about just graduating high school. It is meaningless. It has to become as important as graduating from junior high school. Post-secondary work has to be part of our conversation. Another piece I want to perhaps begin to divorce us from talking about, that poverty is a causal factor for low achievement. And that comes from my friends at the council, my friends from NYU, give me this data point. We've been talking about this a lot, that poor does not equal low achievement. I'm not naive. Poverty does hinder a lot of what we have to do, but it is not an excuse for why we are where we are right now. We don't have a capacity issue, folks. We have a culture issue that we have to address. And if you can't see very clearly, it says very simply that poor white males are outperforming affluent black males across the country. That's what we have to talk about here. So first, some good news, because it's not all bad news, right? When you look at NAEP data, what some call the gold standard for achievement or assessment across the country, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, you begin to see that at least for fourth graders, for 9-year-olds, we're making some gains and some progress. We're closing the gap. If you look at this from 1971 to 2008, you look at the gap for reading, it is narrowing. We got to keep pushing because it can go back. Because we have that kind of history where it was closing, then widening again, but we have seen that it is closing. In terms of looking at mathematics, you see record gains for everybody. The red line, by the way, represents African American, the yellow, Latino, and the, again, I'm color challenged sometimes, the blue is white. I call blue, green, blue. So, but you can see record achievement for everybody for the past 30 years. But you can see the gap narrowing when you're looking at 9-year-old in mathematics. In reading for 13-year-olds, this is where the problems begin to unravel, right? And in our community, everybody wants to mentor, the elementary school kids. I keep telling them, no, I need help in my middle and the high schools. Because the little kids are doing a little bit better. We need help in the middle grades. You see uneven performance in 13-year-olds. You go to mathematics again, you see again increasing, the gap is persistent. This is specifically for 13-year-old mathematics students, persistent gaps, again, but slightly better. The problem we have, honestly, is that we've not made great progress in our high schools across the country. And very simply said, 17-year-olds, in terms of reading, it's been flat from 1984 to 2004 in reading. In 17-year-olds for math, same thing, flat in our high schools across the country. We're not making the progress in high schools. Teasing that apart and looking at the gap, you begin to see again that 17-year-old reading, you can see there's been some improvement in the African Americans around 1988. And by the way, sometimes you can sort of correlate these data points with national movements on reform, right? But once the spotlight goes away, people forget, and we go right back to what we were doing before. But you see that there's not been much progress made when it comes to 17-year-olds. Again, looking at the gap as well. For mathematics, a similar story, looking at 17-year-olds. But this is the one that many of you have seen me talk about before, that for me is about a scary conversation around the gap across the country. Take a look at this, right? The blue, let's see if this will, it's not moving. The blue line represents white 8th graders, and the red are Latino 12th graders, and the other color are African American 12th graders. What you see very simply is that black and Latino seniors in high school, those who make it to the 12th grade in high school, are doing as well as 13-year-old white students. That, for me, sort of really summarizes the gap conversation that we have in our country. Now, one of the things I know business community listen to quite well is when you begin to attach this conversation to dollars and the GDP and economic situation. And McKinsey & Company published a report, I believe it was last year, that looked at this issue, and the title was The Economic Impact of the Achievement Gap in America's Schools. If you Google it, you'll get the entire report as well. And what it shows very simply is that the achievement gap in America is equivalent to about half of $1 trillion in performance in the GDP every single year. So a real dollar value to the achievement gap conversation in our country. In Rochester, a lot of our black male issue goes back to special education. And Dr. David Rochester from Fisher, who helped write IDEA, has been working with us, and now we have the Center from NYU, who are looking at disproportionality and beginning to work with our schools on the cultural issues and the academic issues around special education in our district. And you'll see in a second that overwhelmingly, black males are represented in this conversation. So some quick review from before. You can see the graduation rates, the college persistence rate across New York State. But teasing that out for local conversation, you see that, first of all, we've had an issue in our city that we're beginning to address in a very real way, that special ed kids are isolated. Now, if you take a look at not Freddie Thomas, but Thomas Jefferson High School, that school became a failing school, not because of the leadership of the teachers there, they were working very, very hard, but they had a high concentration of special ed and English language learners. We tend to, as a city, concentrate our special needs kids in very few schools. So this says that 70% of the kids in special ed are not going to a school they would normally would have gone to if they were not special ed. So we are isolating our kids who are special needs in different parts of the city. And of course, isolation yields disengagement. It's not where I would want to go to school. It's not what I'm looking to do. And of course, we do this based on our convenience as adults, not the convenience of children. Of course, lack of opportunity yields failure. So our special ed programs are characterized by high separation and low rates of achievement. And you'll see again that the graduation rate on the single digits for those kids, once a child enters special ed, it tends to be a life sentence. They're there forever and never actually get out. And if I may, it is racial and ethnic bias in the highest proportion. It's what some of us call structural racism, when you see kids being disproportionately pushed into parts of the work. Now, this one I gave to Jim Lawrence a while back. When talking about black males, was a big headline on black male achievement across the country, especially in Rochester. What this shows you is that while African-American males make up about 31% of the population in the district, about 45% of them are in special ed. So nearly half of the kids in special education in the city of Rochester are black males. So that should tell you this disproportionality conversation, right? Overrepresented in the special ed population. So why we have NYU here folks working with us in changing the attitudes in the work that we do in our city. So in general, performance of male students. So on average, we have about 2,300 kids in our cohort. For the class of 2009, it was about 2,900 kids in the cohort. Over half of the kids in the cohort tends to be girls. And by the way, our increases in graduation rates are coming because of the girls, not the boys. It's not a story germane to Rochester, it is a statewide conversation. When I was in New York, we saw this. No matter what the ethnicity, the girls were beating the boys. Even Asians in physics, it was the girls beating the boys. But for us, it's much more stark, right? So females outperform males in every category in the city school district. Males are much more likely to drop out than females in the city school district, and more than likely to be enrolled after 4 years in the city school district. One of the things that we look at in a very big way, and that was our piece with Danny Wegman and the folks from Hillside yesterday, in looking at what category, what drives high school graduation. I was part of a big study done in New York with a group called Parthenon, in looking at 4-year high school graduation. What we found was that, the overaged for grade, kid comes into the 9th grade, if they've been held back once, they're in trouble. Once they become undercredited, their chance of graduating becomes that much less. So when you look at the gate, the 9th grade, you begin to understand where the issues are. If you go to my Young Mothers program, by the way, all those kids are 17 plus in 9th grade. When you look at the dropouts in Rochester, they're all 17, 18, 19, 20, 9th grade. They never leave the 9th grade. We have kids who are in the 9th grade 4 years in a row. So when you talk to principals, that's the conversation. What are you doing for 9th grade? Once they get out of 9th grade, they're going to be okay, ultimately, right? But if they don't come out, well, of course, we know it doesn't start in 9th grade, right? There's a story behind that. So 8th grade ELA, 7th grade literacy, you can see the progression, right? Dropout of high school is a journey, not an event. It takes time for kids to actually say, you know, I've had enough, I'm walking away. So the dropout population is the overage and undercredited population. That's the point I'm going to make around this. Here's some data behind that, right? So for the class of 2007, and I'm sure if you look at 2008, 2009, even 2010, you'll see that nearly 90% of the kids who dropped out were overage and undercredited. If that isn't a flag for us looking at 7 to 9, and again, to beat up my high schools for a second, they've owned the kids 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. They can't blame the elementary school or the middle schools. They've had them. And my high school person will tell you, I beat up on them on a regular basis, pushing data, talking about this conversation. Even our new schools, this is what they're focusing on. We're looking at that and why you begin to see some changes in the graduation rate. So the dropout population is the overage, undercredited population. Now let's take a look at this. 9-12, where kids are retained. What's your data point here? It's 9th grade and 7th grade is where they're retained overall, right? Again, teasing that out, look at this. This is for 9-12, right? You begin to see which kids are being held back. It's black males, right? At a very high rate, 42% are retained in 9th grade in the city school district. Hispanic, it drops to almost 11 or 616 kids. Very different. But you can see the big issues here, right? Looking at 7th grade, what do you see? Black males. 9th grade, black males. Not beating a dead horse, but you can begin to see it's a recurring problem, recurring issue for us, even as a city school district. So, short amount of data, lots of conversation, right? But the one thing we'll say very simply is that to get the work done, it's not just talking about it and having a goal, but it's work behind that. And the question is, what is it? And one thing I'll ask of you is, again, go beyond the headlines. Question. Don't always agree with our strategy. I'm not asking for approval or agreement. Question. Why is it that you're getting so much blowback and noise around trying to do this? There is a reason behind that. Because we know, folks, fundamentally, that the quality of the adults in the school is what drives achievement. Okay? 3 great teachers in a row closes the achievement gap. We have a system that does not reward excellence, that treats every single teacher as if they are a widget. They're all the same, they're interchangeable. We have a system, for instance, that allows us to lay off by seniority only without looking at anything else. I have one principal who told me, she may be here today, that with the layoffs that were coming our way, she may lose every single teacher she hired and recruited and trained over the past 18 months. Will she have teachers? Yes, but not the ones she recruited for that particular new school. So imagine being the head of an organization, and every single year you have no control of your human capital, but we want to hold you accountable for it. That's the driving conversation right now across New York, across the country, to change the way we treat our adults and to hold everybody accountable, all of us accountable to this work. So thank you so much for being here. Standing room. Clearly there is an interest in this conversation and we'll be following up. Thank you.